Genesis chapter 41, verses 1 to 57. I am reading the New Revised Standard Version, the Green Bible. Verse 1. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. Verse 2. And there came up out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed into the reed grass. Verse 3. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. Verse 4. The ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows, and Pharaoh awoke. Verse 5. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of green, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Verse 6. Then 7 ears, thin, blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. Verse 7. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. Verse 8. In the morning, his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my faults today. Verse 10. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of guard. Verse 11. We dream on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own meaning. Verse 12. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each according to his dream. Verse 15. As he interpreted to us, so it turned out, I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Verse 14. And then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was hurriedly brought out of the dungeon. When he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Verse 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Verse 16. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing in the banks of the Nile. Verse 18. And 7 fat cows, fat and sleek, came out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. Verse 19. The 7 other cows came up after them, poor, very ugly and thin. Never have I seen such ugly ones in all the land of Egypt. Verse 20. The thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Verse 21. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had done so, for they were still as ugly as before. Then I awoke. Verse 22. And I fell asleep a second time, and I saw in my dream 7 ears of green, full and good, growing on one stalk. Verse 23. And 7 ears withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouting after them. Verse 24. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. But when I told it to the magicians, there was no one who could explain it to me. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream are one of this and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh that he is about to do. Verse 26. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream are one. Verse 27. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. Verse 28. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 29. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. Verse 30. After them, there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. Verse 31. The plenty will no longer be known in the land because of the famine that will follow, for it will be very grievous. Verse 32. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. 33, now therefore let Pharaoh select a man who is discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Verse 34, let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plenteous years. Verse 35, let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and lay up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. The food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to befall to the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. Verse 37, the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Verse 38, Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find anyone else like this, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Verse 39, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. Verse 40, you shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Verse 41, Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Verse 42, removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. He arrayed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. Verse 43, he had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, and he cried out in front of him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Verse 44, moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Verse 45, Pharaoh gave Joseph the names Zaphinat Paneah, and he gave him Asenat, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. Thus Joseph gained authority over the land of Egypt. Verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. Verse 47, during the 7 plenteous years, the earth produced abundantly. He gathered up all the food of the 7 years when there was plenty in the land of Egypt, and stored up food in the cities. He stored up in every city the food from the fields around it. Verse 49, so Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it. It was beyond measure. Verse 50, before the years of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons, whom Asenat, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Verse 51, Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. Verse 52, the second he named Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortunes. Verse 53, the 7 years of plenty that prevailed in the land of Egypt came to an end. Verse 54, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every country, but throughout the land of Egypt there was bread. Verse 55, when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, what he says to you to do so. In verse 57, and since the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Verse 57, moreover, all the world came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine became severe throughout the world. I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version, the Green Bible. Genesis chapter 41, verses 1 through 57.